Welcome to Fungus Among Us, The Wonderful World of Fungi by Jamie Levine and Janice Strong. The majority of images in this presentation were created by Janice and I. Those images that are not ours are with permission from Pixabay. They are indicated by the green logo at the bottom left. Other images we have are open source with credit given. I will start the talk with a brief side discussion. The entire biosphere, with its web of life, is made possible by the actions of the microbes and plants. It is the microbes that have been the most influential. Life on the planet relies on an enormous quantity of bacteria, fungi, and other tiny organisms. They generate oxygen, keep soils healthy, and regulate the climate. Microbes were the first life and have been influencing the earth, sea, and sky for 3.5 billion years. When we think of the abundance of life on Earth, our basis is to think about the big stuff. In reality, animals represent a very small portion of life on the planet. This graph shows the biomass breakdown. Plants represent 82% of all life on Earth, microbes 14.9%, and fungi 2.2%. All animals on Earth represent just 0.4% of life on the planet. Of that 0.4% of animal life, the vast majority are arthropods and fish. Livestock are over here, and humans represent this amount. Wild animals and birds are only about 1% of all animals. This is the last graph. 86% of all life is terrestrial. Only 1% is in the oceans, and a whopping 13% of life are subsurface microbes. These are the microbes that are several meters below your feet or below the ocean floor and extend down for kilometers. They are the inhabitants of a whole other hidden ecosystem, the subterranean biosphere. Now that you have an idea of the mass distribution of life, let's look at fungi, which you now know is significantly more abundant than animal life. The fungi are their own kingdom and are more closely related to animals than plants. Here is the image that often comes to mind when one thinks about fungi and mold. Mold you see on fruits and bread. Here's mushrooms, turkey tail fungus, coral fungus. What we recognize as fungi are the reproductive parts, the fruiting bodies from where the spores are made and released. The vast amounts of fungal mass is in the main fungal bodies, which largely go unseen. The fungal bodies are made up of microscopic threads called hyphae that are often woven together as large bundles that are visible with the unaided eye, the mycelium. Here, these tangles of mycelial threads end in the spore-forming fruiting bodies. We cultivated this mold on some blueberries for the show. Most of our food does not look like this. Here is a microscopic view of spore formation at the tips of the hyphae. Mushrooms are a familiar type of fruiting body that produce spores. The trees appear to dwarf the mushrooms, but often the reverse is true. The mycelial bodies of mushrooms extend well into the soil and are usually hidden from sight. Shelf fungi appear as wood-like fruiting bodies found on dead and dying trees in the forest. Their hyphae have extensive networks in their tree hosts. These are the sticky droplets common on many shelf fungi. They're rich in many biological compounds, but their function is as yet unknown. Yeast are also a type of fungi. They are single-celled microscopic fungi that reproduce by budding. This picture was taken down our microscope. So now you see what their structure looks like. What do? All fungi secrete enzymes into their environment to break down things so they can be absorbed. It's like having your stomach on the outside, digestive juices out and nutrients in. We use some of their waste products for our advantage. For example, brewer's yeast ferments sugars for energy and produce alcohol as a waste product for the production of beer. And baker's yeast breathes out carbon dioxide that is used to leaven bread. Hyphae, or yeast bodies, are nondescript, yet their true powers are their biochemical wizardry. They can make enzymes to break down just about any organic and many inorganic compounds, and they make a whole slew of bioactive molecules. Many of our commonly used medications are fungal derived. Many antibiotics, statins for lowering cholesterol, medicines that allow for organ transplants to be successful, and the list goes on. Many fungi are also poisonous, and some fungi that colonize plants secrete toxins called mycotoxins. They have been a problem for millennia in contaminated crops worldwide. Fungi are often associated with illness. We have all heard about fungal diseases, from athlete's foot to severe lung infections. However, diseases and toxins are exceedingly rare compared to the ubiquity of fungi. Our bodies are literally crawling with bacteria and fungi on us and in us. Human cells make only 43% of the body's total cell count. The rest are microscopic colonists. Many of the inhabitants are beneficial, and we couldn't live without them. Much of life on Earth is dependent on the actions of fungi. For one, fungi are the great recyclers. These are the saprotrophic fungi. They break down dead things for renewal, releasing the locked up nutrients so they can be used by other organisms. There is no regeneration without degeneration of organic compounds. To prevent being eaten, trees evolved extremely tough cell walls around 400 million years ago. As a consequence, even when dead, they are very hard to break down. For millions of years, nothing could break down the lignin and cellulose that makes up wood. During the Carboniferous period, vast amounts of dead plant material accumulated, eventually turning into the coal deposits we have today. About 300 million years ago, white rot fungus appeared, and they were the first to be able to break down the lignin, putting an end to the making of large coal deposits. All of this biofuel could be recycled, renewed for new life. This is a close-up of a small piece of wood that I broke off from the decaying tree in the previous slide. This dead wood is being broken down by fungus. As I've mentioned previously, fungi have a large molecular toolbox of tricks that enables them to break down just about anything biological and many non-biological things. They can even be used to break down a lot of our own toxic wastes. A current area of study is mycoremediation, in which fungi are used to decontaminate the environment. Fungi have been proven to be a cheap and effective way for removing a wide variety of pollutants. These contaminants include heavy metals, organic pollutants, textile dyes, leather tanning chemicals, and wastewater, petroleum fuels, pharmaceuticals and personal care products, pesticides and herbicides, to name a few. Fungi can even eat rocks, but they can't do it on their own. Fungi have been around for over 1 billion years. Several hundred million years ago, some fungi formed a symbiotic alliance with algae and/or cyanobacteria to become lichen. Lichen are not individual species. They are miniature ecosystems of several organisms functioning as a single stable unit. Here you can see the fungal hyphae surrounding the algae. Not shown are cyanobacteria, which may or may not be present, and they would appear far smaller than the algae. The fungus forms the majority of the lichen partnership. It provides the outer surface of the lichen. It offers support and protection, absorbs moisture, and collects minerals for itself and its occupants. In return, the algae and/or cyanobacteria provide sugars via photosynthesis. As you can see, lichen come in many varieties of colors and shapes. They are often better appreciated close up. Here is a closer view of the same lichen. Spores are released by these small cups. I find their forms quite fascinating. These look like little kitten paws to me. Lichen are the first living things to colonize bare rock. Lichen that reside on rocks secrete acids that slowly eat away at the surface. Here, lichens corrode the stone sculptures on Easter Island, softening them to a clay-like consistency, accelerating the action of weathering. The mechanical action of the fungal threads of the lichen penetrate the spaces between the rock crystals and, together with changes in temperature and moisture, break down rock into soil. This paves the way for the progression of life on land. As rock starts to crumble into soil, mosses, then trees can gain a foothold. Lichen can be found not only on rocks, but on many surfaces that are stationary for long periods of time. Each type of lichen has its preferred substrate or surface to reside upon. The lichen that live on trees don't feed on the bark. They only use the bark for support. They have no ill effect on the tree. These are examples of wolf lichen. It protects itself from being eaten by being poisonous to consume. The tree lichens get the nutrients they need from rainwater and dust. Bird droppings also provide high levels of nitrogen. Food they get from their resident bacteria or algae via photosynthesis. Lichen are found worldwide. They can live in extreme cold and dry conditions. They can tolerate these extremes by becoming dormant. When conditions are favorable, they recover quickly. Lichen have some interesting ways they can propagate themselves. On the outer edges of some lichen, powdery microscopic blobs called soredia are formed. These soredia contain fungal hyphae entrapping a few algal cells and/or some cyanobacteria. They can be released like powdery microscopic spores. They are like little spaceships floating away. When they find a suitable surface to land on, they can begin to grow, forming a new lichen community. Sometimes whole pieces of lichen might break away and get blown around until they too find a suitable substrate. The fungal portion of a lichen may also reproduce sexually, forming spores. When they land, they have to find an algae to partner up with to be successful. Now that we have discussed the symbiosis of fungi with algae and bacteria to become lichen, it's time to explore another type of symbiosis that fungi possess. This is the partnership that many types of fungi have with the roots of 90% of plants, the mycorrhizal network. Myco means fungus and rhiza means roots. Hyphae tie into the plant roots, greatly expanding the roots domain into the soil. The fungi provide nutrients to their plant hosts in exchange for sugars. Janice will continue with the mysteries that go on in the soil.
Ever walk through an old-growth forest and wonder how those little trees ever get enough sunlight? Or do you ever wonder how those little trees even get enough nutrients when all those neighboring trees with their much more extensive roots take all the food? Over the past 4 decades, researchers in temperate conifer forests learned that trees communicate via underground fungal networks, and they share resources. Trees and fungi form symbiotic relationships. Most forest fungi are beneficial to plants, such as decaying their plant waste or facilitating nutrient exchanges. Fungi, it seems, is the forest's guardian, the network server, the nursery, the hospital, and the forest police. The network is far more than conduits or pipelines. Research with fungi is accelerating worldwide. Here are some of the things we do know. Fungi find the most efficient way to navigate complex environments. Scientists measured fungi navigating quickly through several kinds of mazes toward food sources. They do this by rapidly redirecting their growing tips. They expand one edge of themselves while pruning back others. Without consciousness, without brains, without neurons. Trees and fungi send signals to each other, respond to electrical impulses, and transmit warnings of predation. However they do it, the transmission speed through the fungal network is far faster than passive diffusion alone. There are thousands of fungal species and hundreds of kilometers of fungal threads under a single footstep in the forest. The mycelial strands are much smaller than plant roots and can reach farther into the soil. Some plant species link to thousands of fungal species, while some plants only link to less than 10. Let's look at the Wood Wide Web. The magazine Nature, the apex of scientific research papers, first coined the term Wood Wide Web when they titled an article by Suzanne Simard in 1997. Her article rocked the conventional forest management practices in BC and the world. Simard is a Canadian researcher and a professor of forest ecology at the University of British Columbia. She explains her extensive and vigorous research in her book, Finding the Mother Tree, Discovering the Wisdom of the Forest. In a CBC Quarks and Quarks interview, Simard said mycorrhizal fungi actually go into a symbiotic relationship with the tree. Simard determined that forests depend on an interlacing fungal connections between trees, plants, bacteria, and even viruses to fasten a forest into a complex network. Her investigation spanned many years, and Simard's other findings showed that trees supply essential minerals to younger seedlings, and they also recognize their kin. Forest fungi and plants operate like a supply and demand economy. It's a typical market-driven exchange. I buy your stuff for as low a price as possible and sell my stuff for as high a price as possible. The market settles on a fair price depending on the current supply and demand. It's the same supply and demand economy between fungi and plants. Plants use carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and sunlight to make hydrocarbons, or sugars, during photosynthesis. Plants then store and use their sugars for food. But plants also share up to 30% of their sugar stores with the underground fungal network. Then, in exchange, fungi distribute phosphorus, water, and other stuff like minerals back to the plants. The fungi can also hoard resources, and they redirect substances to where the fungi gets the best exchange rates. Researchers don't know how a fungi decides what to move and what to hold on to. The network is a fluctuating supply and demand economy, and I find this fascinating. In all of this, is it altruistic or opportunistic? Simard discovered that different species communicate via the fungal network to help each other. The old trees are well connected to the fungal network and are key to maintaining a healthy forest ecosystem. Simard called these old trees mother trees. Because complex fungal connections link older trees with the whole forest, nutrients are given to smaller trees nearby. To complete these exchanges, the forest thrives and the fungi can release spores. Later, in another extensive study plot in BC forests, Simard shaded some seedlings and left others uncovered. The results show plant resources moved via the fungal network to feed the seedlings held in the shade. Simard also found other benefits to fir saplings growing under the leafy canopy of deciduous neighbors. It's for protection. When birch shaded the little fir saplings, the shade and protection reduced sun scald, erosion, and frost damage on the young fir. When fir saplings outgrew their protective deciduous neighbors, the fir gave resources back to the birch and aspen. Seasonal trading partners. Simard also tracked isotope movements of carbon throughout several growing seasons, and that's even more intriguing. The fir, being an evergreen, photosynthesizes year-round. Birch only makes its own food in late spring and summer. The two tree species share their sugar resources and switch the sender and receiver depending on the seasons throughout the year. In spring, when the deciduous birch trees are leafless, the fir trees share their carbon with birch. The sharing switches in summer. Fir trees are in the shade under the leafy birch. Birch then sends carbon compounds to the fir. It flips again in autumn when the deciduous lose their leaves and the conifers still photosynthesize. The fir trees once again move carbon into birch trees. In winter, fir trees still photosynthesize, but very slowly. The forest fungal networks don't just include trees, they connect herbaceous plants like fireweed, azaleas, ferns, and wildflowers. In addition, nitrogen fixers such as alders and lupine are integral to the network. Besides Susan Simard's research in BC's forest, much of the other data for our presentation came from Merlin Sheldrake's book, Entangled Life: How Fungi Make Our Worlds, Change Our Minds, and Shape Our Future. Sheldrake asks in his book, is the movement of forest resources arranged by the fungus for the benefit of that fungus? Are fungal networks repressive, feudal lords, or benevolent facilitators? Why should a fungus even care if plants in its network stay healthy? Plants that are connected to a network grow stronger and faster. These healthy plants, in turn, keep the fungus network in good shape, and the whole forest ecosystem thrives. His research and many scientists throughout the last 40 years concur that fungi may be the drivers of the exchanges. Every living thing needs other organisms to survive. For example, we need bacteria to digest our food and keep our immune system functioning. We also need certain fungi and viruses to keep us alive. So it's not surprising that plants need other organisms too. And it's fungal networks that graft with plants for mutual survival. There are a few kinds of fungi found in temperate forests. One kind that Jamie already described is the saprotrophic fungi. They recycle plant nutrients back into the system and consume dead wood. Many common edible mushrooms such as morels, cremini, white button, portobello, and shiitake are some of the decomposing type of fungi. Another kind of forest fungi requires live plant roots for its nutrition, and it's pronounced mycorrhiza. Some of the mycorrhiza mushrooms include favorites such as truffles and chanterelles. Some of these types completely encases plant roots. They may actually pierce plant roots to absorb what they need. How horrible, you say. Are trees helplessly surrounded and invaded by fungi? But wait, what about the trees? Don't they have control? Aren't they fighting back? It's not a lose-lose situation for the trees, nor it is a gain-gain opportunity for the fungus. In our typical plant-centered approach, we assume trees drive the exchange. But what if the fungus coordinates or even cooperates the choices? Fungus is an organism, and like all organisms, fungus too sets its own agenda. Let's look at truffles. Here's one example of a bizarre fungal network agenda. It's truffle mushrooms. They look like potatoes or dinner buns with an insanely irresistible attraction to mammals. Talk about communication between species. Truffles and mammals are the extremes. I just looked up the price for a pound of fresh truffles in the world market. Today, buyers can pay up to $4,000 for a single pound, about half a kilogram. Aroma is their value. The truffles must be served to consumers within 48 hours of harvest, or they lose their smell. They can't be dried, frozen, or otherwise stored, so their scarcity reflects their price. Anyway, truffles, like all mushrooms, must produce spores. But because they're mature underground, sometimes half a meter deep, the spores can't be distributed via the air. So instead, truffles rely on powerful, attractive scents. Truffles, like all forest fungi, react to chemically sensitive membranes. They detect molecules of change and are constantly bathed in chemical information signals. Mice, dogs, pigs, humans, and most other mammals can't resist their allure. Fungal fruiting body must be delicious enough to motivate an animal to eat it. The spores are then distributed in feces. Truffles and highly trained truffle hunting dogs are big business, and truffle forests are protected at great expense from poachers. People don't train pigs to find and dig up the truffles, even though pigs have a greater compulsion to find truffles than do dogs. Pigs like the fungi so much they consume them before humans can even retrieve their treasure. So humans train dogs to seek out the valuable truffle mushrooms. Sheldrake wrote in his book, "Few other organisms convince humans to pursue them with such urgency." The dark side. As we know, the world is not a blissful utopian harmony, but in every ecosystem, some participants live on the dark side. For example, parasitic fungi kill their host. Other fungi extract nutrients from plants but give nothing back. Besides fungal dangers, the dark side is also seething with nasty predatory bacteria and infectious viruses that hijacked the underground transmission highway. They wreak havoc. It's the network as a whole that responds to the threats. As always, it's a balance of survival. Researchers also tracked loose hormones, chemical compounds, enzymes, RNA, and DNA traveling through the fungal highway. This area of research is only beginning, and much more needs to be done. One of the weird guys in the fungal world is the fungus that turns ants into zombie ants. I will turn that section over to Jamie.
The Ophiocordyceps fungus hijacks ants' muscles and nervous system to perform its own agenda. The infected ant is compelled to leave its nest and climb up a branch, orient themselves to the sun, and choose a leaf that is 25 centimeters above the soil. This location is precise and sets the ant at the right north-south orientation and temperature and humidity for the fungus to produce spores. There, they grasp a leaf with their mandibles in a death grip. Once secured in place, the fungus grows a stalk from the ant's head. The fungus then digests the ant's body and releases spores that rain down onto the ants passing below. Here are photos of infected ants. The characteristic bite marks that ants make on leaves when overtaken by fungus have been seen in fossils 48 million years old. There are numerous zombie fungi that control other insects. Sometimes they collaborate with viruses to control the mind while the fungus controls the body. To quote from Sheldrake's book Entangled Life, it seems fungi have been manipulating minds as long as there have been minds to manipulate.
Fungus is not the only thing making intoxicants. Plants too offer them. Peyote comes from cactus. Cannabis from a herbaceous plant. Opium from flowers are just a few. We think this is one of the mind-altering mushrooms, but it's also considered highly poisonous. Mushrooms are not to be fooled around with. Their potency also varies considerably. Humans have been using mind-bending mushrooms for thousands of years in every culture on every continent. But although the fungi induce spiritual awe and wonder, their use was historically restricted to shamans and spiritual leaders. Ancient cave art may suggest the use of hallucinogenic mushrooms. The oldest known representation of fungal use is in the Sahara Desert. The site is dated from 9000 to 7000 BCE. They are in the Tassili Caves in Algeria. In the drawings, people hold mushroom-shaped objects, and mushroom-shaped things come out of their limbs and heads. Hallucinogenic mushrooms are still used in many cultures. Their ingestion leads to an alternate perception of reality. People imagine visions of fantasy and otherworldly hallucinations of the underworld, ghosts, or even death. Fungal drugs temporarily change people's awareness of the nature of reality. Just how does a fungus alter mental states? Scientists are still unclear. The drug effect didn't increase overall brain activity as researchers expected. Instead, the chemicals quieted brain activity in several key areas, command center areas. The fungus reduced the brain master control functions of what is called the default mode network, DMN. This part of the brain, in healthy individuals, stabilizes planning and balances our relationships to the past and the future. What the fungal drug does is unfasten the brain's leash. As a result, parts of the brain that normally don't communicate are free to explore. Investigators using an MRI notice widespread cerebral connectivity in the test users' brains. These compounds intrigued researchers. By isolating specific chemicals, scientific research is finding medicinal uses for some of these compounds. The mind-altering fungal drugs deploy the same general type of chemicals found in the zombie ant fungi. In addition, that ant fungus is closely related to another dangerous chemical, the ergot alkaloids. In its natural form, ergot is a deadly poison to people who eat infected grains, especially rye. When grains were scarce, the citizens had to eat moldy grain, which they didn't know contained the deadly toxin. Ergot poisoning killed hundreds of thousands throughout the centuries. They called it St. Anthony's fire. However, in very small quantities, ergot's muscle and blood constricting properties were beneficial to hasten childbirth and reduce bleeding after delivery. These formulas were familiar to alchemists and used by midwives for generations. Based on previous research, in the 1930s, a research chemist separated an active substance from ergot to stimulate human respiratory and circulatory systems. But instead, he made another mind-altering compound. After noticing its effects on animals, he tried it on himself several times, mind you. He discovered its hallucinogenic properties. The drug today is known as LSD. LSD became illegal in 1957, but researchers are gaining legal access to mind-influencing drugs and are using them to treat neurological conditions. Mental illness patients report reduction or sometimes complete absence of symptoms using these chemicals. Some other conditions treated by mind-altering fungi chemicals are distress, including PTSD, anxiety. The compounds also improve feelings of quality of life in cancer patients, chronic pain patients, and it helps them feel less hopeless and improve patients' outlook on their lives. The drugs allow patients more connections to others and reduces their depression. Why are these compounds in so many fungi and plants? In evolution, if a gene or a group of genes does not offer benefit or offers no harm, they usually mutate and disintegrate away from the genome. However, these long chains of genetic material remain stable and intact for millions of years and across many lineages. Why? Like everything in fungal studies, the research is only in its infancy. Many questions need to be posed and answers need to be found, but the awareness of fungi's importance is expanding worldwide. We are finding fungal uses for everything from food, medicine, environmental cleanup, forest sustainability, building materials, and structural fabrications, such as bricks, furniture, shipping crates, replacing foam packaging around consumer products. Other markets for fungi filaments are replacements for graphite in lithium batteries, and fungi make a reliable and affordable skin substrate for healing wounds. Fungi can also reduce organ rejections following organ transplants. The fungal research and their potential seems as limited as the fungal connections that already lace our world.
In summary, the fungi, with their entourage of microbes, are the great recyclers of the biosphere. Fungi are also the facilitators of communication in the plant world via their mycorrhizal network. When put into perspective, we realize that all the animals, including us, are just temporary tenants here. It is the microbes that are the true guardians of the planet. Throughout great spans of time and numerous extinctions, they have kept the planet habitable for life and brought about recovery, and they will continue to do so. Here are a few pictures of us taking photos for this presentation. Thanks for watching.